We typically say February, March is silly season with all the news and information that's coming out. You could say the last 24 hours have been silly season. We're going to unpack that all here and more on this episode of Moving the Line. Hello and welcome to Move the Line. I'm Brian Noonan, joined here, as always, by Connor Allen, and then always draft season. Scott Smith been killing it for us as well. Also bringing in a guest, one of the most accurate mockers just a handful of years ago, and always has a lot of success. Love his grind. You can find his stuff over at DraftPlex and at DraftPlex on Twitter. It is Jason Pruett. Jason, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Happy to get on here with you guys and talk some draft.
It is our passion. Hopefully folks have been riding with us. We're going live now, though. We've been, we're past, we can't really just, things that move so much, we can't basically store anything for a show to come out, 15, 16 hours after we record, the way that the markets have been moving, even in the last 12 hours or so. So it's been absolutely crazy. If you were joining us, thanks for doing that. Thumbs up, like on YouTube, share the show. We appreciate it. You can also find the show in podcast form, wherever you listen to podcasts, 5 stars, all the stuff there. If you're listening, show notes, we're going to do our best. Hopefully, if you want to bounce around and see what we're talking about, the show notes will have some of that stuff for you too. Also be able to find access of how you can get a betting subscription at 4for4 for cheap. You can go over to 4for4.com/plans and get you the betting sub, get you access to everything on our site. If you play fantasy sports, if you're in the best ball streets, if you like to bet on other things, Scott does great MMA content. We have the NBA playoffs going on right now. The betting sub gets you access to literally all of it. We've partnered with No House Advantage. They're a pick'em site. You can go over to your app store, download No House Advantage, $5 minimum deposit, $5. It's going to get you a 3-month betting subscription just to get you a little taste, get you through all this draft stuff, take you through the NBA draft stuff. Connor and I are going back and forth about NBA draft stuff already, so we're ready for that market to start to hit. It gets you a little bit, won't take you through the full season, but that's available for you too if you head over to 4for4.com/plans. Connor, I'll start with you, buddy. How are we doing? Been a pretty crazy market movement in the last couple days, definitely since the last time we met.
Yeah, we got left holding the bag a little bit here. I feel like I just want to put out a disclaimer for those who've been listening to our show since the first draft season one. I think at the beginning, we all felt pretty good about CJ Stroud going first overall. And, a lot of people are ridiculing that. And I don't think that's necessarily fair. We had heard from at least 4 to 5 different people who don't know each other. We're not talking to the same people, that we know that the Panthers were extremely interested in CJ Stroud at the beginning. Since then, obviously they've gone through the process. At this point, it looks like Bryce Young is the overwhelming favorite. Scott Fitterer came out today and said that the decision has still not been finalized, but that they think they're on the same page. So again, David Tepper is been known to change his mind on the flip of a dime, but I would say at this point, it is looking very, very likely to be Bryce Young.
And we've seen that reflected in the markets, pretty heavily here. We're going from we've shifted from the CJ Stroud stuff into, low level -200 favorites, -300 favorite for Bryce Young up to I think it's -1400 on DraftKings as of an hour ago. So prohibitive favorites. We've moved through some of this stuff too. Scott, how we
a little bit of a freeze there with the internet, but look, I'm doing good. We're getting into the last kind of final week of everything, and hey, Fitterer said there's some clarity within their draft room now. So -1400, unplayable for Bryce Young, and we're kind of hitting on some of these other guys that we're looking at in the top 10. So I'm interested and happy to have Jason Pruett on, 2020's most accurate mock drafter, guy I've kind of corresponded with over the years, and he does a lot of good work. And that's why I wanted to have him on and get some of his thoughts on how this draft's going to unfold.
So let's get into that a little bit, Jason. You've had some success doing this. You have your own site, like I said, DraftPlex. Folks can head over at DraftPlex on Twitter, DraftPlex.com. Talk to me about your process in terms of building mock drafts. Reliance on big boards, reliance on sources. Talk to us a little bit about your process and how you go about it.
Yeah, so my process kind of changed. I've been doing this is my 10th draft. Just kind of been doing it on the side, and obviously, as Scott mentioned, 2020, I won the scoring on the mock draft scoring championship. So that kind of put me on the map. But since then, I've kind of had to whittle back what it is I do. But I still watch, about 500 players, over the course of probably about the 6 months leading up to the draft. As I build the mock draft, I do a 1.0. This point, I do a 7-round, and then I do the final. So with the 1.0 is really kind of just once I get all that information aggregated, I run through it and kind of look at all the team needs, who they're kind of talking to, because that usually comes out like right after the combine. So a lot of the work hasn't been done just yet. The 7-round is a little more fluid, I think, and that's the one I released most recently. And that takes into account a lot of that more so, but more just looking at needs and then how that board falls in that scenario. The final obviously is the big one that we try to get right. And a lot of people pay attention to that obviously for betting purposes and things like that. And, I haven't been as closely aligned to that kind of space in previous years, but certainly the interest just widespread around the draft has increased so much. So I take that into account, and I've certainly watched you guys and some of the conversations you've had. That certainly put some ideas in my head, and I go back and look at it. I was like, that does actually make a lot of sense. You see it aligned with the odds, and so I've kind of started to put that as another input into what I do with the final mock draft, and then seeing how this stuff plays out with, especially right at the very top with this draft. I mean, this is another draft where everybody was kind of really sure what was going to happen at 1, and then it kind of just flipped, and now it just seems like full steam ahead in that. I do still think there's a chance that CJ Stroud could go number 1, but at this point, it seems pretty obvious that Bryce Young is going to be the pick. So as far as I go, it starts there. And then I think I mentioned this before we jumped on. It's like this thing could quickly go off the rails depending on what happens, like at number 2, and then even into the top 5. Because I think there are a lot of picks right there at the very top 10 that are still really hard to call. Looking at what teams can and maybe willing to do, and then even some talk about some teams jumping up into the top 10 depending on who's there. So that's just a little bit about me. I do this all at NFLDraftPlex.com. So all of the boards and mocks go up there, and I even just off whim put together a first-round mock last night. And when I was done, I was like, this might be it. And we're 10 days ahead of the draft. And I'm like, okay, that's good, but it could be really, really dangerous for me from scoring purposes, because a lot of things can still happen here in the next, week and change. So that's kind of where we are now.
No disrespect. I promise you it's not it. It's just so much that happens, and, it feels so good. When it all comes together, I get it because I play around. I actually have the tab open. Like I what I do for the first round, constantly messing around with it. You're like, oh, this fits and this makes sense. And it's like, it's almost like we talk about like building a DFS lineup or a showdown lineup that tells a story. Like this lineup, this first round makes sense schematically. And then, we still got 5-6 trades that'll happen that we don't even know about. It throws the whole thing off. So,
yeah, that's the interesting thing about mine is when I went through it, like about 8, 9, 10, all the way on, it doesn't make sense for what I had thought going into it. And that's why I was like, I feel pretty good about this because it's not necessarily what I've seen out there. And so I think, for what I do, I know a lot of people stick with chalk. I just like to take that big swing and we'll see what happens. And sometimes it works. So you take that deep cut, and in 2020 it worked. Last couple of years and not quite as advantageous to me, but like I said, it's not something that where I'm looking at and it's like, oh, everybody has this pick, everybody has this pick, everybody has this pick, because as you mentioned, like you're lucky if you get half of this right between fits and then also just players going in the first round. So we'll see how it goes. I'm sure I'll be sitting there looking at it and staring at it right up until the deadline to drop it in, but we'll see. I feel okay about it right now, but that can certainly change, definitely.
Well, for the listeners, we're preparing you with the best. Scott's been one of the best for a long time, and is really plugged in. Again, if you're tuning in for the first time, I think you can go back. There's, I think, really good takeaways in our previous shows, even though some betting markets have moved. I think some of the insight that Scott's been able to give to us, and I think has made all of us and our process a little bit better. Connor, I want to go to you real quick before we move on to some of the number 2 stuff. You talked about Scott Fitterer, the Panthers GM, saying the decision has not been made. I agree about that. As we're recording, I believe CJ Stroud is in-house meeting with the with the Panthers. Is it, to you at this point, essentially a two-man race, or is there any viability to anyone outside of Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, knowing that Bryce Young, obviously the betting markets are telling us that it's almost done?
Yeah, so one of our listeners, Patrick, brought it up. How bored will CJ Stroud and Will Levis be on their visits today because they are on the same day, which I found very interesting and unique. I think that in itself might be a little bit telling. I'm not sure how much we can take away from that. But I did think something was interesting from Scott Fitterer's conference today. He had some little bit that didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. It was, he said, oh, whatever quarterback we take, there's no pressure to get on the field. They can sit behind Andy for a little bit if they need to develop. And for me, I was like, that's not really a normal thing you'd say if you really were like, oh, Bryce Young's the guy, because Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are very much like the most like pure ready to go passers. So that kind of brought me back to Anthony Richardson. I was like, okay, well, they talk nonstop about Bryce Young for 30 minutes. So there's plenty of other quotes you could have pulled there. But the way just him saying that after talking about Bryce Young for 20 minutes was a little bit strange and something that I thought was worth noting because, again, if it's not finalized, you never know. But that being said, I think probably at this point, it's best to operate under the assumption that it'll be Bryce.
Yeah, we'll do that probably here for the sake of the show as we get into kind of the rest of the board. I'm kind of there, and I don't know what it is. Like, it's not typically my style, but I feel that way this week with all like some of the movement. And I feel like anything right now that people want to tell you is like locked in, really without sourced, just speculative, just with like mass groupthink. I just feel more likely to push back on some of that. Because I just feel like their draft is more wide open than partially because there aren't a lot of like top level talents in this spot. I think once you get through at a certain spot, and we can talk about where that teardrop is, you kind of have a lot of wide open stuff from like, say, 10 to 40. And they could just go a lot of different ways. So when there's massive groupthink in one area, especially in the betting markets, I'm going to try to lean and find opportunities to get some plus numbers that are going against that a little bit. So we'll move to 2. There's been not just movement at the top at 1, the movement of who's going 2, and some of the posturing that's been coming out of Houston in terms of, well, look, Bryce Young has been their guy, again, allegedly, and we're not feeling like we have to take a quarterback at that spot. Hey, look, the division's wide open. We went 3-2-1 in the division last year with Davis Mills. We got a new defensive-minded head coach. He's got a long leash. Why don't we build it on the defensive side of the ball, and we'll wait. We'll see if we can position ourselves for a quarterback another year. There could be some posturing there in terms of having, say, a division rival at number 4, and the Colts have to move up and give up some assets to draft the quarterback that they've identified that they like. Or maybe they are willing to go, Scott, without a quarterback at 2. Where are you right now in the Texans? Obviously a massive movement in terms of Will Levis being the number 2 pick, who's basically been the 4th guy for a couple of weeks here, clearly. And now maybe he's getting some steam, and maybe that makes some sense.
Yeah, right now I think you can get even money on both Levis and Stroud at like plus 300. I think at DraftKings to go ahead and be that second player off the board. It's interesting because there's not even we've been talking to Will Anderson as like the top defensive player coming off the board, but there's been a lot of steam towards Tyree Wilson. I've been trying to dig up and I've reached out to a few people. I've heard that his medicals have come back good on the recheck there. He had the first week of April. So any drop off that he might have had, outside of the top 10 due to medical reasons is kind of off the board. And a lot of teams and a lot of scouts are basically saying that he's the best pass rusher in this draft, even over Will Anderson. Will Anderson may be a cleaner prospect than a lot of these other guys, but he might not have that elite upside that some of these other guys do. Tyree Wilson's kind of been compared to Chandler Jones with his wingspan and kind of the way he plays a little bit. And look, Lance Zierlein's supposed to be the guy that's plugged in there in Houston, and he had them taking, Tyree Wilson there at 2. So, it can go a number of different ways here at Houston. And just to kind of piggyback on what Connor said, God help us if the first pick is Anthony Richardson and we're all surprised. It's going to throw a nuclear bomb in the middle of all mock drafts. So I think for the way I'm going to proceed, and I'll probably put out a mock draft here in the next day or 2, I'm going to proceed with Bryce Young there at 1. And I just don't see the way that Houston can pass up on CJ Stroud at 2. I don't buy the narrative that they don't want him because he's got the same agent as what Deshaun Watson did. And I've heard the opposite, that, at the end of that negotiation, there was no beef between, the agent and the team. So I just don't see them. I don't see a reason for them to pass up on CJ Stroud. And there's been scouts that think that CJ Stroud's actually a good fit for Houston. So, that's kind of where I sit, where I'm leaning right now is Stroud going at 2.
Where are you at with 2, Jason, in terms of quarterback, no quarterback? And if it is a quarterback, which one is it? And then, again, this is kind of the nature of it. It's all 2, right? It's quarterback, yes or no. And then it's which quarterback. And then if it's 2, well, now we've moved off of the perfect prospect, allegedly, Will Anderson for, a year and a half. And now Tyree Wilson is the new shiny toy. Where are you with the Texans at 2?
Yeah, I think we're just in that orbit of any one of those possibilities. The one I would have a hard time with is them taking Will Levis at 2. I can see them, if they don't go quarterback at 2 and say they do go with Will Anderson or Tyree Wilson, trying to come back around at 12 or maybe a little bit of a trade up into 10 to pick up Levis. I just feel like that. I know like the going opinion is like if a quarterback is your guy, that's you take him, right? It doesn't matter where he is. We saw that with like the Giants with Daniel Jones years ago. So right now I've come around to the idea of them not going quarterback at 2. I think from a like a fan base perspective, that's not going to make anybody happy. But you look at kind of where like DeMeco Ryans come from, like in San Francisco, where they got a team built around, and then they had a bus driver, game manager type quarterback that's been successful. Sure, they did do that big trade for Trey Lance, but thus far they've seen no returns from that. And if you want to actually compete in that division, like what are you going to do if you don't have the quarterback? Well, it hasn't been that strong, but Jacksonville obviously is rising. They've got a stud with Trevor Lawrence. But you look at the Texans, I don't know how far away that they are from actually competing for that division. So is the quarterback gonna solve that? Yeah, you want to hitch your wagon to a guy early, but they could be in a position where let's get the best player. They may see that as CJ Stroud. They may see that as Will Anderson. They may see that as Tyree Wilson. Let's take that player at 2, and then when we come back at 12, there's still some fluctuation you could have in terms of moving up depending on how that board falls, because I don't think we're going to see 4 quarterbacks in the top 5. I think we'll see probably 3. I think if Houston passes, I think either Indianapolis or maybe the Raiders, maybe the Titans are going to jump up to 3 with Arizona, and that's where CJ Stroud is going to go. I think he'll be the second quarterback off the board, one way or the other. So we'll see how that plays out. But right now I've come around to the idea of, maybe they will take Will Anderson at 2. Like, he's a clean prospect. Tyree Wilson, there is some buzz about him having the highest ceiling. I did see Peter Schrager's mock this morning. He had the Colts actually trading up to 2 with Houston, which, can happen, but you don't know a trade like that within the division. But I think DeForest Buckner was the piece within that, so you could see how that could work. And then they ended up taking Tyree Wilson. So I'm still kind of going back and forth with the quarterback. It would be CJ Stroud. I think Scott has a good point. It's like, I know the hot take would be like, oh, they don't want to deal with an agent. It's not like David Mugheleta doesn't represent a lot of different players, so you're going to have to work with him regardless. So if there's no beef there, they shouldn't have a problem taking CJ Stroud at 2, and that probably actually would be the best choice for them to make moving forward if they're really looking to, compete and start, getting DeMeco Ryans his guy to kind of connect at the hip and move forward with his team as they, start a new regime. So.
Yeah, no, I think that beyond
Connor,
that
you,
too,
your thoughts on the Texans?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I have kind of been digging deep on like the Texans like dynamics up top, and something that I had gotten passed along to me was that Nick Caserio is not really in a great position right now. And from my understanding, there were some offseason dynamics that didn't really play out his way, and it kind of leads me to believe that like Cal McNair, essentially the owner at this point, or, the owner's son, might step in and overrule Caserio if he doesn't like the decision that he's making. So I think a very, I guess from my outsider point of view on this, it would be that Caserio is very happy with taking a defensive player, and DeMeco Ryans is probably happy with that because DeMeco is, 6-year contract or whatever it was. And Caserio's like, all right, I'm just going to build the best team and we'll be good in the future. Now, does Cal agree with that? Does that, jive with kind of the thoughts of the franchise's direction? I'm not sure. And it would not be surprising to see the owner overturn that. Now, we've seen in Lance Zierlein's mock, originally he had them trading up to 7 to pick Will Levis. We've seen multiple people other report that Will Levis is their second quarterback on the board, for better or worse. Again, I don't know how true that is, but that's just what was reported. We've also heard 3 other things on the defensive prospect. They don't go quarterback. That we've heard that Will Anderson is a perfect grade for them. We've also heard that they prefer Tyree Wilson. I don't buy the whole Will Anderson as a perfect grade thing. I think that anyone knowing that at this point would be kind of ridiculous. But I think at this point we've seen Lance say multiple times, who has been basically like a keyboard warrior on Twitter, for the last couple of days with his replies, saying like, I had Tyree over there over Will Anderson for a reason. He said, I have Will Anderson ranked over Tyree. Do the math on why I have Tyree over Will Anderson in my mocks. That was, I think, basically the quote that he said multiple times on Twitter. So for someone who nailed both the draft picks last year and has a pretty decent insight, I think that's worth noting as well. So personally, I think go either way, but right now I'm leaning towards it being, not Will Anderson. That would be kind of my lean, would be one of those 3. So Levis, Stroud, or Tyree Wilson, gun to the head. I think the owner forces him to pick Will Levis or CJ Stroud.
The one pushback I would have just on it not being a quarterback at that point, they're picking there at 12. Supply and demand as far as the quarterbacks go, if somebody's going to trade up, it's probably going to be for a quarterback. So there's a high possibility if they don't pick a quarterback there at 2, that quarterback that they want may not make it there to 12. Whereas you start looking at defenders and you still have edge rushers there that are ranked pretty highly. Whether it be Lucas Van Ness, Nolan Smith, a few of these other guys, there's a supply of edge rushers in this first round should they decide to either take one there at 12 or even move back a little bit.
And that's why I still am on the quarterback side of things here. And we have to do this at times. We have to separate any thoughts around our thoughts of the prospect himself. And we can talk about Will Levis and the questions that he has as a passer and all of those things. It seems to be pretty clear. Now, we've talked about Mike Lombardi on the show before. Like, he's plugged in. And whether he's right or wrong, he is been around long enough to definitely have some sources around the league, and has been very adamant that the Colts at 4 have Levis as their next guy, ahead of CJ Stroud, and definitely ahead of Stroud. And then the Stroud-Richardson conversation is one that needs to be had. So maybe the Texans know that as well, and maybe this is another level of posturing to try to get the Colts to move up to 2 to give up something to get their guy. Because I think the Levis team is not just team. I do think it's kind of baked into some, I think, actionable news in terms of where the hierarchy is for some of these quarterbacks. So the Stroud thing gets really interesting because you start to see a possibility where he can really slide a little bit. Whereas I could see someone maybe being enamored with all the tools that an Anthony Richardson has. So yeah, I mean, the 2 thing is really interesting. Connor, I could get back to you for 3 with the Cardinals. We've been waiting for the trade. The market kind of told us that the trade was definitely happening based off of the Will Anderson number. Now that moved back massively because the Will Anderson number back at 3.5 is basically even money. And then a lot of reports are saying there's just not a lot of people dying to get up to that spot at 3.
Yeah, one last bit here on 2, though. So Will Levis was like 10-1 yesterday. And then I know a syndicate that claims that they had good intel say we started kind of like bombing that line. We're sitting at Will Levis plus 250, plus 180. He's a favorite to be the second overall pick at Caesars. Now, again, that's not fully indicative of what's going to happen, but I certainly think that I'm not the only one who's heard that they could be interested in Will Levis. Now, again, that might be posturing. So now the third overall pick, though, I think is massively influenced by this whole hullabaloo at the top with whether or not, because if they go 1 Bryce Young, what do the Texans do? And that really impacts the Cardinals' ability to potentially trade out of this pick. If CJ Stroud's sitting there at 3, I mean, they are much better off waiting until the draft and that happening and then getting someone to trade up for CJ Stroud if his value is as reflected in the media. And
nope, we lost your mic. It was such a hot take that the internet wasn't ready for it all at once. Are you sharing my internet right now? I think maybe you're sharing my internet.
Yeah, I'm back in a second.
Yeah, so the 3 thing is interesting because, they have so many needs. They have a ton of needs defensively, right? We know that they need a corner. We know that they need an edge. They were there in a spot where it maybe is a little early for any of them. You feel like you're missing an opportunity, Scott, to sit there at 3 and just take the best guy on your board, knowing that there are a lot of options for teams that want to move up. And Scott, you're muted.
When you start digging into it, initially it was reported that there were 6 teams calling the Cardinals looking to move up. I've only been able to confirm 3. The one that interests me the most is actually Detroit, who is rumored to be in love with Tyree Wilson. Infatuated was the word that was used. And then also to be interested in the possibility of CJ Stroud, because that's a team that is moving in a certain direction. They're trending upward, and they may not be able to have this opportunity in the near future, in the coming years, to draft a quarterback like CJ Stroud to possibly replace Jared Goff. So that's one of the teams that I'm kind of interested to see what they're going to do here in that spot.
Yeah, it looks like Noonan's frozen again. But yeah, I think if the Cardinals do stay pat here, Jason, I'm interested in your opinion. Like, say the board falls with, if they have their choice of pick and they have to stay at 3, who are they going to pick?
Yeah, I think it comes down to either one of those 2 top edge rushers or one of those 2 corners. So Anderson, Wilson, Gonzalez, Witherspoon. I think Will Anderson has been kind of the prevailing favorite kind of this whole time, just because, they're starting over fresh. It's a good, safe, high floor, maybe not as high ceiling pick as you might want to think with Tyree Wilson. So they'd be in a good spot to just draft whoever the best defensive player is on their board. But certainly I think they would want to hold out, just because they've got so many needs to kind of get some picks, and whoever could get the best offer, obviously that offer would get, there's the balance, right, of having an offer from further down. They'll probably give you more, but you do probably drop out of the range of all 4 of those guys, depending on how far you go. If they go past maybe 7, 8, if say like Tennessee were to jump up, the Detroit one's interesting. I hadn't seen that as of yet, but I could certainly see that based on who's there, especially if they wanted to go up and get the quarterback, because with the pick that they have at 6, it is kind of house money because it's from the trade with the Rams. So take your shot while you got it. And as Scott mentioned, they're a team that's on the rise and are looking to compete now. So if they could go ahead and set themselves up for the future, I mean, they certainly have a lot of picks in this draft, so they could be a player to move up or down depending on what they'd like to do.
And another interesting part with Arizona sitting there at 3, when we start trying to figure out who it is that might trade up, they've had some confirmed meetings with both Will Anderson and Tyree Wilson, but no top 30 visits. When you start looking at their top 30 visits have been with a lot of the top tackles and offensive linemen in this draft. So, they could be gearing up for the potential to move down as far as 11 with Tennessee, or, in that range where they may be looking at offensive line help rather than drafting one of these top defensive players.
Yeah, it looks like 8 visits from the offensive line. Sam Hoppin, our data guy here at 4 for 4, put together some of that, a chart tracking some of that stuff. I think it echoes Scott's point there too. Connor's an opportunity lost for the Cardinals to sit there at 3 and just make a pick.
Well, I mean, if you look at their roster, it seems like everything we've heard coming up to the draft, and I've reached out to multiple people as well, like, hey, what are they trading down? And the answer I keep getting was that has been the plan the entire time. Now, the question is, if every team knows that, are they going to try and rip them off? Are they going to try and, not get face value for this move? And would the Cardinals still accept that? And personally, I think they would. With their current state of their roster, they just need so many more picks that even if you're moving back a couple spots and picking up a second, or maybe like something like later, like you just need so much help all over the board that I wouldn't be surprised if they take a deal where you're like, oh, they should have gotten way more than that. But I mean, again, you sit there and you pick a guy like Tyree or Will Anderson. If they're not going to change your franchise, which I don't know if either of them probably are, then you probably have to move down and just take more picks.
Last week, Daigle was the first time that I've really heard anyone really push back on the thought on the Colts taking a quarterback at 4. Seems like they can be there and be caught holding the bag and get whoever's left. Not a lot of excitement there, but again, if Will Levis is their guy, tough to see where it feels like Chris Ballard maybe fighting to keep his job. They have a quarterback in Gardner Minshew who is familiar with Shane Steichen's system. Is that a tough sell for the local fan base? Probably a little bit, but again, you keep hearing these thoughts around Seattle at 5, Detroit at 6. Hey, we don't have plans of coming back up here and drafting for another handful of years. Like, well, respectfully, no shit. No one plans on drafting inside the top 5, top 6 year in and year out. If you don't identify one of those quarterbacks as being the guy, then that's a different thing. Those are definitely, Jason, like two of the, I know you touched on it a little bit, but like those are the variables around the quarterback here because they are the luxury picks. We want to have a team trade in ahead with Arizona to identify someone that wants one of these guys, but they kind of hold a power position sitting there at 5 and 6.
Yeah, I think with Indianapolis, I saw Jim Irsay tweeted something out that showed all 4 of the quarterbacks, and people were noting the order that Anthony Richardson was first. And I think once they kind of set in place having Gardner Minshew, I think Anthony Richardson became a real possibility for them. I don't know if that's still the case, especially depending on where CJ Stroud goes. I think you might want to, especially with Chris Ballard, probably being on the hot seat this year after so many different whiffs at trying to get a quarterback in there that's going to work and going the veteran route. Anthony Richardson would probably buy him some time, but I think CJ Stroud would be like the one where it's like, okay, we can put him in right away, and we're taking our shot with somebody who can come out of the gate as a starter day one, and Minshew would kind of be like the bridge for an Anthony Richardson if they were in that place. And I think that would be the play for them. If somebody does move into 3 ahead of them, they'd probably go Richardson and maybe use that as buying him some time to develop. But yeah, I thought it was interesting to go the route of them not taking a quarterback. I don't want to say they're forced into doing that, but it's like you have to do that based on the way that the past few years have gone. And I don't know about the Levis team there. I mean, I think that would make sense for them. It would be again a hard time for me to try to make that work in my head that that's going to be their guy, especially depending on the different scenarios that could play out. But them going with a corner or an edge, I just feel like would be throwing more resources at the defense when your offense is just still going to have. I don't think Gardner Minshew is probably a league average to below average starter. Certainly, everybody's been waiting for him to get maybe another opportunity, having bounced around from Jacksonville to Philadelphia. And, now in Indianapolis, I just think, like you said, he's somebody that knows the playbook, can step in, can be either the bridge or spot starter, depending on what happens there. But Indy, I think, is almost in a position where they have to take the quarterback, whether that's the 3rd, 2nd, maybe even the 4th. I don't think it's be the 4th, but we'll see what happens.
Connor, any interest there in a non-quarterback for the Colts?
No, I think they absolutely have to take quarterback. I mean, I'll gladly, if any of our listeners want some side action, I'll lay 3-1, minus 300 on it. If they want 3-1 and them not taking quarterback, I will gladly take that action because I think they're locked into a quarterback. Also, what's worth noting, Jason, is that Irsay tweeted out the pictures, but when you screenshot pictures, it comes up in reverse order. So when you go to select them, that means that he screenshotted Levis first. And then like goes in reverse order. So it appeared Anthony Richardson, like all that, just the way he uploaded it. So I thought that was funny. Yeah. As someone who's a social media manager over here, learned that the hard way, but it's I think you're right. I think that they're going to pick a quarterback here. Basically no matter how the board falls. I don't know if they would consider trading him for 3. They seem pretty happy staying at 4, but I kind of worry about the whole point of them needing a quarterback is can Chris Ballard needs to keep his job. Is Anthony Richardson good enough in year 1 for him to keep his job? Is that Minshew Richardson kind of stopgap going to work? I mean, I tend to lean towards no, but obviously, I'm not in his shoes. So maybe they think so, but that would be the only scenario where I think they wouldn't pick quarterback, but Shane Steichen's history, obviously, I think he's confident enough that I think they'd be just fine with Richardson. So yeah, that's kind of where I lean. I think it's quarterback, 100%.
I'll stay with you, Connor, too. How about the Lions and the Seahawks? Luxury picks, we're told, but both, could use a long-term option at the position, right? Jared Goff and Geno Smith, both kind of similar, right? They filled in nicely. They're probably league average, but the rest of the roster is really ready to compete. And if you can get a young signal caller in there on a rookie deal, and you're already kind of in the spot where you're going to be one of the favorites, closer to the favorites of your division, you're in a pretty good spot for the next handful of years if you hit on the quarterback. Do you think that either of these teams or which one would be more likely to take a quarterback between Seattle at 5 and Detroit at 6.
Yeah, I think probably Seattle at 5. I like that Jason has Anthony Richardson slotted in there, I believe, in his latest mock. I think that makes a ton of sense. Rob Stadden has gone on about saying that he thinks it makes a ton of sense as well with Geno Smith on a 1 year or on a deal that they can easily get out of after 1 year. And then I think for Detroit specifically as well, like we know what Jared Goff is. I actually had this argument today. We have a 6-year sample now of Jared Goff being above average when he has weapons and a great system, and being just absolute dog shit when he doesn't. Like if he's a sum of his parts quarterback at this time, that doesn't mean that the Lions can't win. It's that, like you said, they're probably going to pick mid-20s next year, late 20s. Like, they're probably going to win the division. Like, you're not in the range to get a quarterback. I mean, we're looking at it right now with Tampa Bay, with Washington, or even out of that kind of discussion. They would certainly be in play for a quarterback if they had like enough ammo to get up there, but they don't. And so they're screwed. So it's like, if for some reason things aren't working out in Detroit, I think that a quarterback would make a ton of sense there at 6. Like Scott said, also too, I didn't know that they were considering trading up. I think that adds a little bit more fuel to the fire as well. I think that they're still in play, even if they're probably more likely to go with a win now option, like a Devin Witherspoon, like Jason has. And I think we've all been connecting. I think that if the board falls a certain way, or if they, again, like they have CJ Stroud as like their number 1 prospect in the last 3 years or something, like maybe they trade up to 3 for him and get him. So I think all those are very reasonable options.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting and makes piecing this together. Again, this scenario where they decide not to and they hold on and do what we've all kind of been, pinpointing there would be to address the cornerback position. They don't have anyone on the roster outside of 2023 under contract at corner outside of, Cam Sutton, who they just signed from Pittsburgh. They do need to address that down the road here as well. And again, they have some other picks, and there is some cornerback depth in this draft relative to some other positions. So you can do that at 18. You can start to hit that in the second round. There's some guys that are viable options there. It just depends on what they want to do. That drumbeat is getting a little louder for both clubs, and I do think it makes sense for both. It just gets pretty interesting to see how that kind of plays itself out. The other thing I want to keep going back to is, Will Levis was a guy that we had, you see some mocks, he's fallen all the way down to Tampa Bay, or, we had some stuff where, he's going 11 to Tennessee, who definitely needs to address the position long-term. But I kind of believe some of the stuff we're hearing on Will Levis. And again, like it's juiced out there now. I believe 6.5 is his over-under. I just don't see him getting past maybe 4 at the Colts, as ugly as it might be. And maybe we like CJ Stroud a little bit more. We like Anthony Richardson's ceiling a little bit more. It just feels like there's going to be one of these teams at the top that likes Will Levis. So again, if that continues to get a little bit louder, even though that's a little bit longer juice than we like to lay, the Levis under 6.5 starts to feel like a bet that I'm willing to make here in the next week or so if that gets a little bit louder. So again, the number will move, but again, if we're going to be able to be on the right side of it and timing wise, that's why you want to be in the Discord when we fire those things off. That could be something that I'd be interested in playing here. Then we get to the Raiders, Scott, who, look, we talked about the Jimmy G structure. The contract is really team friendly. It gives them the ability to lean on Jimmy if he's really good, or get out of it fairly quickly and a pretty team friendly deal. The Raiders are another one of these teams as we kind of get into this range. Raiders, Falcons, Bears at 7, 8, 9 that just have a ton of needs. Really, really hard to pinpoint a specific need for these teams, knowing that they have a ton of ways to go. Where do you think the Raiders get in the mix? Because we've talked about the Raiders being a team that maybe fell short of the Panthers and moving up to get that number 1 pick for the Bears. There's been a lot of CJ Stroud talk there as well. Could this be the floor for Stroud? What do you think the Raiders are looking at?
Yeah, I think it is the floor for Stroud, but I just look at that team, and that team has struggled defensively, and I just get the impression that team, with the history that they have with Garoppolo and the coaching staff, I think they're a little bit more confident in Garoppolo than what general fans are, and that team has not failed every year because of Derek Carr. It's been more for the defense. And I think when you have the possibility that one of these defensive players, whether it be Tyree Wilson, Will Anderson, or either of the two top cornerbacks, that's where I tend to lean, with this pick here. And I think that the Raiders roster is bad enough and will have a decent amount of turnover next year to the point where they could be in play if Garoppolo fails to be up here again, drafting again, and possibly hitting on one of the quarterbacks in next year's draft. So I tend to think that they're going to go defense. And I like one of the cornerbacks personally, whether it be Devin Witherspoon or Christian Gonzalez.
Yeah, they could be back in there. You're in the division though with Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert. You kind of want to have something there in terms of the quarterback position. But again, maybe that's something that they can address next year. The defense is terrible, so it'd be hard for them to bypass that as well. It's been consistent from this show. It's been starting to be consistent in a lot of other mocks too, Jason. I know that, and part of it is I've been told that you're a Cowboys fan. I saw in your recent 7-round mock draft that Bijan Robinson conveniently slipped all the way down to the Cowboys at 26. We've been talking about him going to the Falcons quite often. Again, just maybe a franchise that says, hey, we're just going to go off of the top of our board. We know that Arthur Smith loves to run the football. That's been a little reluctant because it kind of flies in the face of what I was talking about earlier, is like it's becoming like the consensus thought where, we got down at 34-1 for the Falcons to take a running back, or 30 to take Bijan. Now it's like plus 210 or something crazy. What are your thoughts on Bijan? I mean, he's a really hard one to pinpoint because of just how the NFL looks at running backs in general.
Yeah, I've come around to that scenario that you guys have presented with Atlanta because every time I do one of the early mocks, I do the 1.0, the super mock, the 7-round. It's kind of just, this is a scenario of how this board fell, right? It's not necessarily slotting it. So I do think Bijan goes much earlier than probably most people think for a first-round running back, because I think he is a special talent. And Atlanta does seem like the spot now because they do have, I won't say that they're set at quarterback, but they have, Ritter, who they probably want to see a little bit more from before they make a choice there. They brought Taylor Heineke in as a free agent pickup. The defense does need a little bit of help, but they did, they had the Okudah trade, which we'll see what comes out of that. So, I mean, I think corner is still a possibility. They did pick up a couple of young edge players last year, and so they might want to see more from that to see how they develop. They signed Kalijah Kancey. They signed David Onyemata. So I think, if you want to protect whoever's playing quarterback, you want to keep the defense off the field. How do you do that? You run the ball. And Bijan is somebody that could do that. They could put him, either with or in place of Tyler Algier, who did, have 1,000 yards last year. But Bijan also gives him another weapon in the passing game. So I think that could be the appeal of him not just being, he's a guy you just hand the ball off to 30 times. You can use him within that offense in different ways. So he makes him a little bit more of a weapon than just, your standard, mid-round running back who will just plug in and you hand him the ball off, and that's what you get. And you're not going to have a high ceiling. Bijan does have that high ceiling. He could be a Derrick Henry type player in Arthur Smith's offense. And, you put him with Pitts, with Drake London, all of a sudden now you've got a little bit of weapons around whoever's going to be playing quarterback. You keep the defense off the field. So it does make a whole heck of a lot of sense for them to look at that, going with that running back early there at 8 for Atlanta.
Connor still holding strong with Bijan?
I don't know. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense from an outsider point of view. Like everything that Jason said just makes a ton of sense. We've talked about it relentlessly on the show, but I don't know. I mean, maybe I just don't have sources in Atlanta, but I haven't heard shit that they like anyone right now. So, I mean, kind of most of the buzz has been like edge, like edge or, defensive lineman. But I mean, it's tough not to pencil him there. That being said, I'm not taking like plus 200 on Bijan to Atlanta. I think at that point, like the market's already gone. I'd rather take a stab on them somehow not doing that. But I guess it goes back to the question, like if not Atlanta, then who? Because I have questions about him in Philly. I don't really think that he would go there. Tennessee, if they trade Derrick Henry, maybe, but they need so much other stuff that it's crazy. Houston doesn't make a whole lot of sense as well. I mean, like there's next teams like Washington. I don't know. I mean, like that I could see reasonably consider taking a running back. So again, I think I'm definitely leaning towards Atlanta because it makes a ton of sense, but I want actual cut. Like, I don't know. Has there been like a single report like, oh, the Atlanta Falcons love Bijan?
No, we've seen like they're locked on Falcons guys talking about it and, getting really excited about like some of the market movement. I've seen some of those tweets. Right. Again, that's not, actionable content. That's, respectfully fanboys getting really excited about them taking a really exciting prospect. Cause he's right. He's awesome. If you're just, you're a Falcons fan, it's like, that's an exciting guy to be toting the rock 20 times a game for you. And that makes a ton of sense. But yeah, not a lot of actionable stuff there. I kind of agree with Jason. They have taken some steps to improve the defense. Still a need. for sure, but it makes me feel a little bit more likely. In the offensive line, there's continuity there. It's not a great offensive line, but like they're basically running it back, and from a pass block win rate, they were pretty good. They're pretty solid. So it's not a spot where like they need to address it in the first round. They very much well could, but again, like it doesn't feel like there's a glaring need, especially if you are locked in on saying, hey, Desmond Ritter's who we're moving forward with. The Bears are interesting. We're starting to hear rumors and talks. The Bears are really trying to continue to stockpile because they're another team that needs a lot, and they've already done so by moving from 1 to 9. There is some interest apparently to continue to move back. There are a lot of needs at, say, maybe tackle, and this is a pretty deep, especially in the first round, tackle draft. There's a number of guys that you can stay inside the first round and get a guy that can plug and play for you for day one. Now, they have lost basically everyone on the interior defensive line in free agency. They have not addressed it whatsoever. And Jalen Carter has spent numerous hours visiting the Bears, allegedly, and apparently it's gone fairly well. Scott, I'll kick it to you. I mean, the kind of the combination of the Bears and the home for Jalen Carter, who is, by all means, clean prospects, is going top 5 at least. But obviously we know that's not the case.
Yeah, I tend to have Jalen Carter as the leader in the clubhouse there for Chicago. It was interested in Peter Schrager's mock draft today. I think he had Devin Winston? No, excuse me. It was Christian Gonzalez there. So that was one that I hadn't seen, and a little bit unique across the industry. But I think when we start talking about it, there is a good case that, look, Jalen Carter doesn't make it down to 9. If Jalen Carter doesn't make it down to 9, I think Chicago would be looking to move back a few spots to pick up some other assets. If not, I wholeheartedly think that they're going to go offensive line. They've had visits with some of the top guys, and Darnell Wright's the name that I keep hearing is going to go a lot higher than people think. He's had a top 30 visit there with Chicago. I actually heard that Chicago prefers him a little bit more than Paris Johnson, allegedly. But that's just whispers that are out there right now. But he's the name that I keep hearing, and we even talked about it on the last show. I think there's some good numbers there on Darnell Wright to be first offensive tackle off the board. So it's something that I definitely think is worth taking a stab at.
Yeah, I believe it was 7 last time we talked, but I think it's down to like 350 or so. So it has definitely started to get a little bit of action. Another name that's kind of been populating there, and you'll see in a lot of mock drafts, Connor, but you've been on this from the jump, is Peter Skoronski not being identified as a prospect for the Bears. Skoronski's got a little bit of buzz going to the Eagles. His over-under has moved a little bit. The Eagles are another team that, again, I feel very much that they're in play. And that was something I said in some of our early shows. I said I'd be shocked if the Eagles stayed at 10 and made that pick. It's just not their MO historically to do so. Now, again, they could be in a spot very similar to Scott's point where they're waiting for the one guy. Unfortunately, the Bears are right in front of them. And if that one guy, Jalen Carter, doesn't fall, they'll be looking to trade back. Now we're also getting in the scenario where we've talked at least about 3 or 4 teams that want to trade back. We're not talking about a whole lot of teams that want to trade up. And that's kind of where the sticking point of this draft is going to be for. So what are your thoughts on the Eagles?
Yeah, no, it's just tough. I think the Eagles are in an interesting spot. They could definitely trade back. We've heard rumblings about Skoronski going there. And that's, I think, why it got some pretty strong money there from, our buddy VR, is interested in playing the under 11.5 because that gives him an out with Tennessee, gives him an out with the Eagles, potentially the Bears if you thought they like him. Again, I'm pretty confident at this point with a combination of public and private sources that they do not. But, I think that he's in play for either 10 or 11. So that makes sense there. I know you were interested in buying back the other way at 10.5 with plus money. And I think that is certainly in play, as well. Because again, it's like Philly or bust. They could easily trade down, but trading down is way easier said than done. But that being said, there's always 4 or 5 teams that trade up every year. I mean, we're in that Bijan Robinson range where I think Bijan Robinson could easily be picked over any of these guys. Now, trading up for running back is another story, but I think combination of different things here. I think that I would probably lean over at plus money on 10.5 at Peter Skoronski because it really does feel like one out at that point. But Paris Johnson's another tough one there. And to Scott's point, I think we're actually seeing still some like a plus 800 on Darnell Wright at FanDuel.
Wow, okay.
To be first offensive lineman drafted. I know John Daigle kind of touted that last week, and I think it makes a lot of sense if Chicago does stand pat and takes an offensive lineman there because I think that it could very easily be him there at 9-1 or 8-1. So I think that's worth a look for sure. But I'm gonna reach out to some of the Bears people, keep my boots on the ground and see if we can get some of that finalized action here in the next week or so in Chicago.
Yeah, I like that too. I think it's just the Skoronski thing where VR played it at 11.5. I think makes a lot of sense. Now that you're at 10.5, I think it becomes pretty thin because I don't think you have a ton of outs. Again, I don't think Atlanta's a landing spot for him. And then Chicago seems like, a spot based off of, again, the public information. We saw that little flash on the screen there with, what they prioritize in terms of traits and someone like Skoronski, and again, was very effective in the Big Ten for a number of years. Shorter arms. It just doesn't seem like a spot that they want to go to. So you feel like you want to move off of that. Jason, any thoughts on the Titans? They kind of fit the bucket of some of these teams that we're talking about here. A lot of needs. Again, a quarterback stopgap for this year, a defense that's had quite a bit of turnover, but continues to get coached up above its maybe level of talent year in and year out. They took a swing late in the draft last year with Malik Willis. We saw how that went. And really a team that's lost a lot of offensive line talent, has questionable wide receiver talent. And they're really hard to pinpoint in terms of what they need and what they're going to do here at 11 if they stay there.
Yeah, I think actually my whole way through, I've had them going with a tackle, and I think it's been Paris Johnson every time that I've done it. So I look at that. I mean, I guess the optics going in is they're going to put Andre Dillard at left tackle, and he didn't even play last year, and before that he had lost his job in Philly. So I don't know if that's the best course of action there. And I think putting the Ohio State connection, they might just have a room full of Ohio State tackles if they went Paris Johnson. But I mean, Mike Vrabel's the Ohio State guy, so they could do that. The quarterback thing is interesting. Malik Willis just didn't work out last year, and you see reports of how tied to him they are moving forward. It doesn't seem good. So I think that's certainly a possibility depending on who's there. But we talked about, these quarterbacks are probably all going to get into the top 10. And so they might be left holding the bag unless they try to trade up for that. So, but offensive line, especially if the way this falls, maybe, Darnell Wright, Peter Skoronski go off the board. We could see that run of tackles there, and the Titans take whoever's left between, maybe Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones. So I've kept them, pretty strong on offensive line. I think, Rand Carthon coming from San Francisco, obviously their offensive line is a strength of their team, and you'd want to kind of do that in Tennessee, especially if you're going to continue to run the ball. And whoever plays quarterback there in the future, where it's Tannehill for this year, and then, maybe they pick somebody up later, in the second round. Maybe they look at Hendon Hooker or somebody like, maybe further down. Or even next year, whoever that might be, set them up with a good front in front of them and try to move forward that way. But I think tackle is a good spot for them at 11.
All right. Now we're kind of at that spot where, 53 minutes in or so. I'm going to tee it up, go around the horn a little bit. I'll let you guys talk about a player, a team situation that is of interest to you based off of what we're hearing. We're kind of back at the Texans. The Texans, what they do at 12, and if they stay at 12, I think is really, what happens at 2 matters a lot for the Texans before we go really long there. And Connor, I'll start with you. Is there anything, any player, any team situation kind of in the next few picks that has caught your eye? Anything you want to kind of monitor or share with the folks?
Yeah, I think a couple of situations here. Pittsburgh, obviously just traded for, Allen Robinson, however much that matters for wide receiver. I think he's kind of dust at this point. So if for some reason you kind of had that bid for a wide receiver, maybe that doesn't happen at 17. Again, I don't think that was a really popular thing, but I think it's worth noting nonetheless. Overall, though, they're starting to post a market to be a first round pick market. That was posted at some Canby shops. If you see any of those posted like right away, usually there's a couple guys that stick out. Generally, my preference for betting that market is to take guys that we have a pretty strong read on going kind of in the teens or early 20s and just laying the juice, So like they opened up Darnell Wright at only minus 220 to be a first round pick. I would be absolutely flabbergasted if Darnell Wright is not a first round pick. I mean, like, one of these things where their implied probability is like 70%, my implied probability in my head is probably like 98%, something like that. So like, even if it's at minus 500, like I still think it's a good bet. So that's just kind of my takeaway early on here from some of the later guys here. That being said, we get stuck sometimes with some of these fringe. I like the Emmanuel Michael Murray is not really a fringe guy as much, but Kalijah Cansey has been really volatile. Kaylee Ringo. So those guys look like they could be values, but maybe not.
Yeah, it's a good point. Scott, how about you?
Yeah, one of the things that I've really been looking at is I'm just sick and tired of hearing about Hendon Hooker. And just to piggyback off what we were just talking about with Tennessee, I heard a report that came out, and they said that Tennessee's is looking to stay put at 11 possibly, and they're more likely to trade back up into the first round to get Hendon Hooker than they are to trade up and give up the capital it's going to take to get up and take one of the other quarterbacks. They are a team. Look, they've had multiple visits with Hendon Hooker, which makes a lot of sense. They're there in Tennessee. Hendon Hooker played at Tennessee, so it's one of the things that I'm monitoring. And look, a lot of these media guys, and I've been saying it makes no sense for one of these teams that are there from 21 on down to go ahead and take a quarterback. But looking at Tennessee, if Tennessee does miss out on any of those top 4 guys, and looking at what they have left, a year on Ryan Tannehill and Malik Willis not showing much that he's capable of playing quarterback in the NFL, I think it's starting to get some steam that there is an outside shot that maybe they could move up on the back 2 or 3 picks of the first round and get them if Hendon Hooker's getting as much love from some of these people as he is. It's a possibility that I'm starting to warm up to, even though I don't think it's a smart play for a GM to do.
Makes sense though, and I think that is the best lesson I think anyone can have in listening to this, is that we've all been there. We've been poking holes and almost kind of laughing at the thought of it. Again, 25-year-old quarterback who ran a very limited one side of the field read type offense that hasn't translated super well to the NFL, is coming off of an ACL injury. Like, those are just like red flag, red flag, red flag. But it's been so consistent with the Hendon Hooker stuff, and some of it's not even like bottom of the first round. Some of it's like, oh no, it's a borderline top 10 pick. It's wild. So Scott's ability to get off of his own take and not anchor to a thought, I agree, is correct. And be pliable to the new information that's coming in is the best takeaway I think you can have from listening to the show, reading anything on Jason's website. Like, stay pliable to what's coming in with the new information, because it is, again, it's an information market, and new information does come in because the teams are still formatting and formulating their decisions here too. So kudos to Scott, who's willing to stay pliable and adaptable to the new information. Jason, you anything in this next range, guys, we haven't talked about that is catching your eye, team, player, anything that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'm actually looking at right after what we got talking about, that 13, 14, 15 range, with you got the Jets, you got the Patriots, you got the Packers. Seeing what may or may not go down with an Aaron Rodgers trade, if that would involve a first round pick, and maybe that slots Green Bay in there at 13 as well. And then they have, 2 picks separated by the Patriots in the middle. And I think, that's the range where you want to look at where the first wide receiver might go off the board. I know Jackson Smith-Njigba is the favorite there. I think the Patriots might like Zay Flowers better. They spent a lot of time with him at the Shrine Bowl, and if that put that that information together, he might be the first wide receiver picked at 14. The Packers haven't picked a first round wide receiver in 20 years. It would be sweet irony for them to do it after they trade Aaron Rodgers away. I don't know if they do it or not. I think they just committed to putting more resources into defense, maybe looking at offensive linemen. So just looking at how that happens. And then if they don't take, JSN, if the Patriots, go with Zay Flowers, where does he go to? I see, he could maybe end up maybe at 20 with Seattle. So, I mean, the wide receivers are kind of what I'm looking at, because I do think that's not a strength of this class at the top. I think Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl is the one that pointed out that he's talked to a lot of teams that they only have the one first round grade, which is Jackson Smith-Njigba. But again, you typically only have 18 to 20 first round proper grades. That doesn't preclude anybody from going in the first round proper. But whoever that first wide receiver off the board is, I think is going to be interesting right in that range of 13, 14, 15.
I'll just stay with you here for a second, Jason, too, because I noticed in your mock, and again, it's probably a week or so now, and maybe things have changed.
Yeah.
So you definitely have the ability to back out of any take that's more than 24 hours old.
Sure.
I thought it was interesting. Dalton Kincaid was not in your first round. You actually have him as the third tight end going. You've both Darnell Washington and Dalton Kincaid going very early in the second round. Any thoughts or anything you're hearing on Kincaid? Again, he's moved from being second tight end on the board. The betting markets will tell you he's the favorite currently.
Yeah, no, I think looking at, he did get the clearance on the back injury. So, I mean, I've got him as I move forward with my next mock, and the final one, he's going to be in the first round, and actually would be the first tight end off the board. So that was more just kind of precautionary and just seeing how that fell depending on who it was. So I know there's definitely tight end talk happening in the back half of the first round with Dallas now, with Cincinnati. Maybe one or two other teams within there. And so I think Dalton and Kincaid will definitely be in that first, running with one of the teams that could be looking for a tight end. He might probably be the first one off the board.
All right, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, caution, he wasn't able to test and wasn't doing a lot of the things the other guys were doing in the position because of the back injury. So, yeah, that makes sense. Scott, I want your take real quick on Joey Porter Jr. Again, we'll shout out to our buddy VR who moved the Joey Porter Jr. market with a late night bet on Porter going over 16.5. And as VR can do with a bet, the market shifts drastically. Folks aren't afraid to chase the steam. The 16.5 has moved to 19.5. You've been talking about this, and I know you're plugged into Washington. Washington has a need at cornerback. I think the betting markets will tell you that that's the favorite position for them to take in the first round currently. That's also now, again, 19.5 is telling you that he's getting past the Steelers as well, which, again, to me, the Steelers have two very glaring needs. It's going to be either an offensive tackle or a corner, depending, in my opinion, is if Porter's there or not to make that decision. Unless they had, say, a Paris Johnson fall and they identify, depends on how they kind of want to go through the rankings of the tackles. But that's very clear what happens to me. Porter getting past them, even Porter getting past Detroit at 18, if Detroit's to make a move for a cornerback or Jalen Carter or something like that, like under 19.5 on Porter is looking pretty interesting based off of the market movement, thanks to our buddy VR.
Yeah, I think the line that I saw today is under 18.5 instead of 19.5. But look, like Joey Porter is a guy who's met with a few teams. As a Washington fan, he's met with Washington multiple times. He's popularly mocked to go there to Pittsburgh even a lot of the time as well. But when I look at these mock drafts, the most popular pick to Washington right now, the ones that I value is with Joey Porter there at 16 to Washington. I think it makes sense for what they need. The only way that I see Joey Porter not being that pick is if they're just that much higher on one of these offensive linemen and one of those guys fall. Or what I have seen in some other drafts is the possibility that Devin Witherspoon may not be as highly graded out due to some incomplete athletic profiles and some other things that I've actually seen Devin Witherspoon here and there fall, and I've seen him be taken by Washington. So I think there's some different options. Washington has met with both of those players multiple times, and when you look at the pro days, you look at the confirmed meetings and their top 30 visits, cornerback just makes a lot of sense. It's something that they failed at over multiple years. They signed a cornerback to, I think it was William Jackson to a big contract, and then went ahead and cut him last year. So it's just been a hole in their defense for a while. And they have Kendall Fuller, but he's more of a slot corner. So they need somebody there at helping. And unless it's a Darnell Wright that they're super high on, or one of these big offensive tackles drops down, I could maybe see a case where Skoronski drops down and they take him. But I lean heavily towards Joey Porter there at 16.
Yeah, and look, right now we're looking at the odds with 19.5 on Caesars, under 160, but then 16.5 on DraftKings. The over is like minus 200. So I don't really think that much juice is worth paying for a middle, but I think that it's interesting depending on the way you lean. I think both are viable, but I would certainly lean towards under 19.5. I think Detroit, you made a good case for. I mean, Pittsburgh, definitely. Obviously, we've talked about kind of the ties there that Joey Porter Jr. has, that it's pretty thin, but again, it exists. And it wouldn't surprise me for the Steelers to do that with Joey Porter Jr.'s dad playing there as well. But overall, Jason, I guess one last thing there. We didn't get your take on Hendon Hooker. I mean, any Hendon Hooker love in the first round? I mean, because I want to take the under 4.5 quarterbacks. It's staring me right in the face.
know.
It's like even money at this point, and I think it'll be the worst sweat ever. Just every single trade up, every single pick, you're going to be sweating, thinking it could be Hendon Hooker. So I don't know. What's your take on it?
Yeah, it's very hard for me to justify that. I do see a scenario where that can happen, and it would be a team coming maybe from the within the top 40 there. I look at Philadelphia maybe being a slot there because Howie Roseman obviously can wheel a deal within the draft, and he's always looking and is always a step ahead almost. So like if there were to be a slot for somebody to come up, it'd probably be Philly at 30. I don't know. I'm still debating that whether I want to go that route. I don't think I know the big kind of fit was going to be Minnesota. I just don't think that's going to work out for anybody. One way or the other. I think their front office is not just going the route of we've got to get him here, kind of thing. They do have the one more year with Kirk Cousins, and I think you've seen the ceiling, but there's no insight for me to think that Hendon Hooker would be the guy there for them at 23. So if you see the quarterback come up, in that 28, 29, 30, depending on a team wants to move back, I could certainly see it happening. It's not just something I'm overly in favor of. So we'll see, but I'm not really committed to putting that in yet.
Yeah, I tweeted out the other day. We talked about it as well. Like if I could make a teams to not make their first round pick parlay, I don't think that the Vikings are making a pick there. I think they'd love to trade back. They only have 5 picks. The Ravens as well, very limited draft capital in this draft. They love to have a dozen picks and take a ton of swings. And right now they're not really set up to do that. So I think both those teams are set to move down. I'm going to talk about a bet that I made this morning that I think is interesting, and I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on it. Is talked a little bit last week about the ties with the Chargers. Chris Beatty, the wide receiver coach, ties to Jordan Addison, who originally went to Pitt. Chris Beatty was the receiver coach there. He's now the receiver coach with the Chargers. There's some ties there in Southern California as well when he was at USC. I don't think Jordan Addison lasts. I think there's a very good chance that maybe Seattle plucks him or something ahead of him where he doesn't fall. And I think the betting markets will tell you Chargers draft pick to make. They've come out and said, we need to add team speed and they need to add offensive speed. So like, I agree that if there's a really good receiver, a Zay Flowers or Jordan Addison, that would probably be where I'd lean for the Chargers to go. Now in a scenario where both of those guys come off the board, which I think is possible, I think defensive back is a glaring need for the Chargers. Nasir Adderley, it's like 24, 25-year-old safety, just retired. Bryce Callahan was their slot corner last year, really good. He's a free agent. They have not brought him back. So they have a need, and that's a really good spot for like a Brian Branch, who we know can play slot, who can fill a safety need for Adderley as well. They drafted I think 3rd or 4th round safety a couple of years ago. So technically they have maybe an in-house option, but they kind of have 2 needs. Branch specifically fills both of those as a hybrid player. 7-1 for the Chargers, first position to draft defensive back. It was a sprinkle that I made today that I think is viable. Now, again, I agree, and I hear all the Chargers speed and Chargers receiver stuff, but I think if that doesn't happen, they really have a team that's kind of ready to plug and play if everyone stays healthy outside of the defensive backfield, and the market really doesn't indicate that right now. So Chargers to take a defensive back, I think, is an interesting play based on the price.
So they're 22-1 on DraftKings to take a corner, but Caesars groups defensive backs together at 7-1. So I mean, what do you prefer between those? I don't know. Maybe a little stab on 22-1. I mean, that sounds kind of nice along the line you're thinking, because I don't necessarily disagree, especially at that.
Like JC Jackson was a massive disappointment last year too. Like he got hurt and he sucked. It's like, I don't know. It's pretty much when you go through the team, it's really one of their only needs. So I know teams don't always draft by need, but like that team, if they stay healthy, which they cannot do, they really have a starting offensive line. They have edge rushers. They've added some people in the interior defensive front. They've brought in Eric Kendricks from the Vikings to be, a plug and play off ball linebacker. They really have a lot of needs. Again, that could be a spot for Bijan if he falls, but again, considering what's going on with Austin Eckler there, but yeah, I think just the price is off in the market. So yeah, I got down in the 7-1, but I don't hate the corner. And it goes back to what's branch classified as. And that's kind of the tricky piece with that too.
Yeah, the one thing I'll push back on, and look, I have cornerback as a need for the Chargers there, but I'm looking through my visits. I don't have a confirmed top 30 visit with any of the projected first round cornerbacks or Brian Branch if you classify him as a safety, and I don't even have a confirmed meeting, whether it be at a pro day or any of these other virtual meetings or any of that stuff for the Chargers with any of the guys that are in the first round, whether it be Cam Smith, DJ Turner, Keely Ringo, Forbes, Banks, Porter, Witherspoon. Like, just I don't have it I haven't been able to track down any link. I haven't seen it in a mock draft. So it's definitely something that would be unique that I haven't seen.
Do we have an issue? That jumps out at me too. Like, we barely have any meetings for them based off of what we have from Sam's charting in relation to other teams. That they just don't have much of anything charted. The Rams are another team. Again, they don't pick early. Just in terms of just kind of floating through, Rams, Dolphins, teams that don't have first round picks. Really, the teams that do have first round picks, the Chargers look like one of the lightest visit teams out there comparatively to the market. So that's interesting to me too.
So visits that I have for the Chargers are Jordan Addison, Adetomiwa Adebawore.
Nice.
Getting that one. But I mean, once you go through it, it's Miles Murphy. Those are pretty much the guys that are in the first round that I've been able to have confirmed meetings or top 30 visits with it. Outside of that, it's Julius Brents is another cornerback that's kind of coming up the boards, and Alex Austin of Oregon State. They've had meetings with those guys, but not a lot of these guys are projected in the first round in the secondary.
Yeah, good call. And that's probably why it's priced the way it is. You're not seeing it in any national mock draft really. And it just seems we're going through some team needs work on my own and going through some stuff. It seemed as a price that was off comparatively. So, I like the number that Connor found, and the 7-1 play is something that I'm comfortable making there based off of those needs as well. And yeah, it would be interesting to see how teams utilize those top 30 visits. And if there's, some teams, I think some of that's really actionable and some not so much, but again, love that Scott's super plugged into that. So, all right, did anyone get anything else for the folks before we call it? Not bad. A little over an hour. Jason, we appreciate your time. Anything you want to share with the folks? And again, let folks know where they could find you and all your stuff.
Yeah, no, just, making these final tweaks to content and hoping to wrap up here soon, other than kind of keeping an eye on the, where the movement is this last, week and change for the draft. You can find me at DraftPlex on Twitter. And then my site is NFLDraftPlex.com.
Love it. You probably have not seen The Last of Us this week. We're finalizing some stuff around that because we're getting into the home stretch. News continues to break. We want to do some other different things show-wise, so working on maybe something else later this week. And then next week as well, we're going to probably turn up the heat. You'll probably see us every day, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday as we get closer to deadline day. Submission of mock drafts on Wednesday nights, up to the last minute, making those tweaks for Thursday is really finally almost here. So I love seeing new markets. The Canby book throwing out to be a first round pick is lovely. Would love to see the fine folks over at FanDuel get out there and do that. They let us parlay those last year, which was fantastic money-making opportunity. So if FanDuel wants to get in there, we'd really, really, really appreciate it. And you'll start to see some, I think, final mock drafts from us as well here as we get closer to deadline day. So good stuff as always. Reminder, $5 deposit at No House Advantage gets you a 3-month betting subscription. Use promo code 4for4bets. You'll get an email a little bit down the road, 24, 48 hours after you deposit. I'll let you know how to access the subscription for us. Otherwise, just get the yearly sub, 4for4bets.com/plans. Get you access to everything. You don't have to worry about this little temporary subscription. It'll take you all through next NFL season, all of Scott's MMA bets, NBA, college hoops, all the different stuff that we have going on the site. Check that out. So good stuff as always for Jason, Connor, and Scott. I'm Ryan. We'll see you all sooner than later.
Yeah!